The silent extinction. The ocean moon of Thessera had been singing for 3,000 years. Beneath the frozen surface crust, vast liquid seas pulsed with bioluminescent life, creating symphonies of light that could be seen from orbit. The Thessari people had evolved in these depths, their translucent bodies adorned with patterns that glowed in colors humans had no names for. They were artists, philosophers, and keepers of harmonic traditions that predated most galactic civilizations. Their cities were grown from living coral, their technology merged seamlessly with biology, and their entire culture revolved around the principle of balance. They had never known war, never conceived of violence beyond what was necessary for survival, and had welcomed contact with the galaxy with open hearts and innocent trust. That trust had killed them. 20 years ago, the Zephron Mining Corporation had arrived with surveys and contracts, speaking of mutual benefit and economic opportunity. They had explained that Thessara's crust contained rare isotopes essential for faster-than-light drive construction, materials worth fortunes in the galactic market. The Thessari Council had been hesitant, concerned about environmental impact, but the Zephron representatives had provided extensive studies showing minimal risk. They had shown holographic projections of careful extraction, limited operations, strict environmental protocols. The Thessari, having no experience with corporate deception, had believed them. The mining operations had begun in the northern hemisphere, small at first, then expanding rapidly. Within 5 years, entire sections of the ice crust had been stripped away. The delicate thermal balance that maintained Thessara's liquid oceans began to shift. Chemical runoff from processing plants poisoned entire ecosystems. The bioluminescent algae that formed the base of the food chain started dying, and with it, the entire oceanic web of life began to unravel. The Thessari had protested, had shown evidence of the damage, had pleaded for the operations to stop. Zephron had responded with legal documents, with clauses in contracts written in languages the Thessari barely understood, with arbitration proceedings that dragged on for years while the mining continued. By the time the Thessari realized they had been deceived, it was too late. The damage was irreversible. Thessera was dying, and the Zephron Corporation simply increased extraction rates to maximize profit before the moon became worthless. Elder Morphix floated in the central chamber of what remained of the capital city, watching his people prepare for the end. He was ancient by Thessari standards, nearly 200 cycles old, his bioluminescent patterns faded to dim pulses. Around him, thousands of his people gathered in the dying light, their colors flickering with fear and sorrow. The water temperature had dropped 3 degrees in the past month alone. Soon, the oceans would begin to freeze from within, and the Thessari would die slowly, trapped in ice. Morphix had tried everything. He had appealed to the Zephron Corporation directly, offering to forfeit all contract payments if they would just stop the mining and help repair the damage. They had declined, citing operational costs and shareholder obligations. He had reached out to neighboring systems, seeking asylum, but no one wanted refugees who required such specific environmental conditions. Aquatic species were rare in the galaxy, and accommodating thousands of Thessari would be expensive and complicated. Finally, in desperation, Morphix had done what he swore he would never do. He had gone to the Galactic Council, that ancient assembly of civilizations that claimed to uphold justice and order among the stars. He had prepared his testimony carefully, gathering evidence, documenting every broken promise, every environmental crime, every attempt to seek peaceful resolution. He had transmitted his petition 3 months ago, requesting an emergency session to address what amounted to corporate-sponsored genocide. The council had deliberated for 12 weeks. Morphix had waited, watching his people die by the hundreds each day, hoping against hope that someone in the vast galaxy would care enough to help. The council session was broadcast on open frequencies, available to any species with the technology to receive it. Morphix watched from Thessera, surrounded by his advisors, as representatives from 43 civilizations gathered in the Great Assembly Hall on the neutral station Concord Prime. The chamber was magnificent, built to accommodate wildly different species. Aquatic delegates floated in suspension tanks, methane breathers occupied sealed environments, and gravity-dependent beings used various platforms adjusted to their needs. It was a testament to galactic cooperation, a symbol of unity among the stars. Ambassador Sarah Chen of Earth stood at the human delegation platform, reviewing her notes one final time. She was 42 years old, a career diplomat who had spent the last decade learning to navigate the complex politics of galactic society. Humanity was still relatively new to the Council, barely 50 years since first contact, and they were often dismissed as naive idealists by older civilizations. Sarah had learned to pick her battles carefully, to build alliances slowly, to understand that changing minds in the Council required patience and political capital. But when she had read the Thessari petition, something in her had broken. She had spent 2 weeks researching the case, verifying every claim, and what she found had filled her with cold fury. This was not a complex political situation with multiple valid perspectives. This was murder, dressed up in contracts and legal language, sanctioned by silence. The session began with formal proceedings, the council chair being, a crystalline entity named Harmonix, calling the assembly to order. The Thessari case was presented by Morphix himself, transmitted via holographic projection since he could not survive the journey to Concord Prime. He spoke simply and clearly, showing images of his dying world, presenting medical records of Thessari suffering from chemical poisoning, displaying the contracts that Zephron had used to trap his people. He did not beg or plead, but simply laid out the facts and asked for intervention. When he finished, there was a long silence in the chamber. Then the rebuttals began. The Zephron Corporation had sent their own delegation, a team of Roghathi lawyers known throughout the galaxy for their ability to find loopholes in any law. They argued that all operations had been conducted within the terms of the signed agreements, that the Thessari had been fully informed of potential risks, that environmental changes were unfortunate but fell within acceptable parameters as defined by galactic trade law. They presented their own experts, their own studies showing that the Thessari claims were exaggerated. The debate stretched for hours. Various council members offered their perspectives, each shaped by their own species' interests and philosophies. The Keltharian Confederacy argued that interfering with corporate operations would set a dangerous precedent that could destabilize the galactic economy. The Synthetic Collective questioned whether organic species' suffering should outweigh contractual obligations. The Methrin Empire suggested that the Thessari's situation was tragic but ultimately a result of their own poor negotiation. Sarah listened to it all, feeling her anger build with each rationalization, each cold calculation that reduced genocide to an acceptable cost of doing business. When the floor finally opened for additional statements, she requested to speak. The council chair being acknowledged her, and Sarah stepped forward to the central platform where all delegates could see her clearly. She did not use notes. She spoke from memory and from the heart, her voice steady but carrying an edge that made several delegates shift uncomfortably. She talked about Earth's own history, about corporations that had poisoned rivers and destroyed forests, about indigenous peoples driven from their lands by legal documents they could not read, about the long struggle to establish that profit could never justify destruction. She pointed out that every argument being made to abandon the Thessari had been made before on Earth, had been proven morally bankrupt, and had led to suffering that humanity was still trying to atone for. She reminded the council that they had laws against genocide, laws against environmental destruction, laws designed to protect the vulnerable from the powerful. She asked them directly whether those laws meant anything, or whether they were simply words used to make civilized species feel better about themselves while looking away from inconvenient atrocities. The chamber was completely silent when she finished. Several delegates would not meet her eyes. Ambassador Chen returned to her platform and cast Earth's vote. Yes, for immediate intervention, for emergency relief operations, for sanctions against the Zephron Corporation, and for asylum offers to the Thessari people. She knew it would not be enough, but she wanted it on record that someone had tried. The final vote came 3 hours later, after closed deliberations and political negotiations Sarah was not privy to. 41 civilizations voted against intervention, citing concerns about precedent, economic stability, and the sovereign rights of corporations operating under legal contracts. One civilization abstained, unable to decide between morality and practicality. And one civilization voted yes. Humanity stood alone. The council chair being announced the decision with formal regret, noting that while the Thessari situation was unfortunate, the council could not justify intervention given the legal complexities involved. Resources would be made available for voluntary relocation efforts, and a committee would be formed to study stronger environmental protection standards for future contracts. It was, Sarah thought bitterly, the kind of meaningless gesture that would allow everyone to feel they had done something while actually doing nothing at all. The session ended, delegates dispersed, and somewhere in the dying oceans of Thessera, Elder Morphix watched his last hope die. He turned to his advisors, seeing his own despair reflected in their dimming bioluminescence, and began to compose a message to his people. They would face the end with dignity, as they had faced everything else. They would sing the old songs one last time as the oceans froze. Their light would fade, but they would not abandon who they were in their final moments. The transmission from Earth arrived 6 hours later. Morphix almost deleted it, assuming it was a message of sympathy, the kind of empty condolence that made the sender feel better while doing nothing for the recipient. But something made him open it, perhaps simple curiosity about what humanity wanted to say now that the council had spoken. The face that appeared was human, female, middle-aged with dark hair pulled back severely and eyes that looked like they had not slept in days. She wore a formal suit with insignia that Morphix recognized as indicating high governmental authority. Her name appeared as President Elena Vasquez, leader of the unified Earth government. She spoke without preamble, her words direct and urgent. Elder Morphix, my name is Elena Vasquez and I am contacting you on behalf of humanity. The Galactic Council has voted, but Earth has not. We are preparing a relief fleet to evacuate your people and provide medical treatment for those suffering from poisoning. We have identified several underwater habitats in Earth's oceans that can be modified to accommodate Thessari environmental needs. We are also preparing legal action against the Zephron Corporation, though I will not lie to you, that process will take years. What I can promise is that within 72 hours, human ships will be in your system, and we will not leave until every Thessari who wants to evacuate is safely aboard. The Council may have abandoned you, but humanity will not. Please prepare your people for transport and transmit your exact population numbers and medical needs. We are coming, Elder Morphix, and no law is going to stop us. The transmission ended. Morphix floated in stunned silence, replaying the message 3 times to ensure he had understood correctly. Around him, his advisors began to stir, their bioluminescence flickering with something that might have been hope or might have been disbelief. Finally, one of them spoke, her voice trembling. Elder, is this real? Can they truly be coming? Morphix did not know how to answer. Humanity was one species among thousands, relatively young, with limited resources compared to galactic powers. They had voted alone in the Council, had no allies, no leverage. Helping the Thessari would cost them politically and economically, would potentially make enemies of powerful civilizations. There was no logical reason for them to follow through on this promise. But there had been something in President Vasquez's eyes, something fierce and determined that reminded Morphix of the ancient Thessari heroes from stories told to children. A quality that said some things mattered more than logic or cost. He began drafting a response, his tendrils moving carefully over the communication interface. If humanity was truly coming, then the Thessari needed to be ready. They had perhaps 60,000 individuals left alive, scattered across 12 remaining cities. Many were too sick to travel easily, poisoned by years of toxic exposure. The evacuation would be complicated, dangerous, and would require precise coordination. But it would also require something the Thessari had been lacking for months. It would require hope, and somehow, impossibly, these humans had just given them exactly that. Morphix sent the response, transmitted population data and medical information, and then called an assembly of all remaining city elders. There was work to do, preparations to make, and maybe, just maybe, a reason to believe that the light of Thessera would not fade after all. The rescue against all odds. Commander Jackson Torres stood on the bridge of the UESS Perseverance, watching the ice moon of Thessera grow larger in the viewscreen. Around his ship, 17 other human vessels maintained formation, a mix of military escorts, medical ships, and converted colony transports retrofitted for aquatic species. It was the largest fleet Earth had ever sent beyond its own system, and it was about to commit an act that would be considered illegal by most of the galaxy. Torres was 54 years old, a naval officer who had served through the Titan Rebellion and the Martian independence crisis. He had gray threading through his black hair, scars from old battles, and the kind of weathered face that came from years spent in command. He had never disobeyed an order in his life, had always believed in following proper channels and respecting established law. But when President Vasquez had personally briefed him on this mission, had looked him in the eye and asked if he was willing to break galactic law to save 60,000 lives, he had not hesitated for even a moment. The mission parameters were clear. Evacuate all Thessari who wanted to leave, provide immediate medical treatment to those suffering from chemical poisoning, and secure any cultural artifacts or genetic samples the Thessari considered essential to their civilization. Do all of this as quickly as possible, because the moment human ships entered Thessara's system, they would be in violation of corporate territory rights, interference with legal business operations, and a dozen other regulations that Torres did not particularly care about. He had spent the 70-hour journey drilling his crews, coordinating with medical teams, and reviewing everything humanity had learned about Thessari biology and culture. The challenge was enormous. Thessari required liquid water environments with specific temperature, pressure, and chemical composition. The transport ships had been retrofitted with massive water tanks, but the logistics of moving tens of thousands of aquatic beings through space was unlike anything humanity had attempted before. Dr. Maya Okonkwo floated through one of the retrofitted transport sections, inspecting the water filtration systems one last time. She was the chief medical officer for the operation, a specialist in xenobiology who had spent the last 5 years studying the few Thessari medical records available through galactic databases. She was 40 years old, born in Lagos and educated at the Geneva Institute of Interspecies Medicine, and she had volunteered for this mission the moment it was announced. The Thessari condition broke her heart. Chemical poisoning from mining runoff had caused systemic damage to their bioluminescent organs, respiratory systems, and reproductive capabilities. Many were dying slowly, their bodies unable to process the toxins that had saturated their environment. Maya had assembled a team of 30 specialists and brought every piece of equipment Earth could spare. They would do triage on site, stabilize the worst cases, and provide ongoing treatment during the journey back to Earth. It would not be enough to save everyone, but it would save some, and that was worth everything. The fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of Thessara's system, and immediately every sensor operator on every ship began scanning for corporate vessels. Torres knew they were coming. The Zephron Corporation had security forces throughout this region, private military contractors who protected their operations from pirates and competitors. Those same forces would not hesitate to interfere with an unauthorized evacuation, especially one conducted by a species acting in direct defiance of Council policy. For now, the scans showed clear space, but Torres knew that would not last. He opened a channel to all ships, his voice calm and authoritative. All vessels, this is Torres. We are proceeding to Thessara at maximum subluminal speed. Medical teams, begin final preparation for rapid deployment. Security teams, maintain alert status Alpha. We have a job to do, and we are going to do it right. Let us bring these people home. The response from Elder Morphix came through 20 minutes later, transmitted from deep beneath Thessara's ice. Commander Torres, we have received your fleet. We are prepared for evacuation, but I must warn you that Zephron security forces patrol this system regularly. You are placing yourselves at tremendous risk. Torres smiled slightly and composed his response. Elder Morphix, humanity has a saying, some things are worth the risk. Your people are one of those things. We will begin landing operations within the hour. Please direct your people to the designated gathering points. We are here to help, and nothing is going to stop us. The landing was complicated. Human ships were not designed for underwater operations, so they had to use specialized insertion pods, small submersible vehicles that could carry teams and equipment to the Thessari cities. Torres coordinated from orbit while ground teams led by Lieutenant Commander Rashid coordinated the actual evacuation. Rashid was 38, a combat engineer who had served in underwater salvage operations on Europa and knew more about operating in liquid environments than anyone else in the fleet. He piloted the first submersible down through kilometers of ice, breaking through into the dark ocean below, and what he saw took his breath away. The Thessari cities glowed faintly in the darkness, bioluminescent structures that looked like living art. But the light was dying, dimming, like watching a candle slowly burn out. The water itself felt wrong, colder than it should be, with a chemical taste that Rashid's suit sensors immediately flagged as toxic. He could see Thessari moving through the water, their translucent bodies showing internal systems struggling to function. Many were being carried by others, too weak to swim on their own. It was a civilization in its death throes, and humanity had arrived just in time to witness the end or to prevent it. The first group of Thessari approached Rashid's submersible cautiously, their bioluminescence flickering in patterns that his translation software struggled to interpret. Elder Morphix was among them, his ancient body showing the toll of weeks spent coordinating his people's survival. He communicated through a device that converted his light patterns into spoken language, his voice synthesized but conveying genuine emotion. "You came. You actually came. We began to believe it was a dream, a hallucination brought on by desperation." Rashid opened the submersible's cargo bay, revealing medical equipment and portable water purification units. "We came, Elder, and we brought friends. We have 17 ships in orbit with space for everyone. We have doctors who know how to treat chemical poisoning. We have habitats being prepared on Earth that will keep your people safe. We are not leaving until every one of you who wants to come is safely aboard." The evacuation began immediately, organized chaos as human teams coordinated with Thessari elders to move people from dying cities to the insertion points. The worst cases went first, those suffering from severe poisoning who might not survive another day. Dr. Okonkwo and her medical teams worked frantically, setting up triage stations in the submersibles, providing emergency treatment, stabilizing critical patients. She found herself surrounded by Thessari suffering from conditions she had only read about in theoretical papers, making decisions in real time with lives hanging in the balance. She lost 3 patients in the first hour, their bodies too damaged to save, and she forced herself to move on to the next one, to save who she could. The work was exhausting, heartbreaking, and absolutely essential. Hours passed in a blur of activity. Thousands of Thessari were loaded into transport ships, entire cities were evacuated, cultural artifacts were carefully packed and secured. The human crews worked with impressive efficiency, treating each Thessari refugee with dignity and care, making sure families stayed together, accommodating special needs. Torres monitored everything from the Perseverance, coordinating traffic patterns, managing resources, watching his tactical displays for any sign of corporate ships. The sign came 6 hours into the operation. "Contacts," his tactical officer announced sharply. Multiple vessels dropping out of faster-than-light travel. Configuration matches Zephron security forces. 7 ships, frigate to destroyer class. "They are hailing us, sir." Torres had been expecting this. He straightened in his command chair, checked his uniform reflexively, and nodded to his communications officer. "Put them through." The face that appeared on the view screen was Vorgothi, the same species that had represented Zephron at the council. This one wore military insignia and had the cold eyes of someone who solved problems with force. "Human Commander, this is Captain Zaxer of the Zephron Security Fleet. You are conducting illegal operations in corporate territory and interfering with sanctioned business activities. Cease all operations immediately, withdraw your forces, and prepare to be boarded for violation of galactic trade law." Torres met the Vorgothi's gaze steadily. "Captain Zaxer, we are conducting humanitarian relief operations for a dying civilian population. We have no interest in your mining operations and will depart as soon as all refugees who wish to evacuate are safely aboard our vessels. We are not interfering with your business. We are saving lives." Zaxer's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. The Thessari are subjects of ongoing corporate operations under legal contract. Removing them constitutes theft of biological resources and breach of employment agreements. You will cease immediately or we will use force to stop you. Torres felt anger flare but kept his voice level. Captain, these people are dying because your corporation poisoned their world. They are refugees seeking asylum, which is their right under any reasonable interpretation of galactic law. We are not going to abandon them just because you have legal paperwork. The standoff crystallized in that moment, two commanders staring at each other across the void of space, each waiting for the other to blink. Zaxxer's ships outnumbered the human military escorts, but Torres had 17 vessels including transports full of refugees. Any fight would be complicated, messy, and potentially catastrophic for the very people they were trying to save. Zaxxer seemed to be calculating the same variables, weighing corporate interests against the potential cost. Finally, the Vorgothi spoke, his tone cold. You have 12 hours to complete your operations and depart. After that, we will forcibly remove your vessels. Any Thessari remaining on Thessera will be considered contract violators and dealt with accordingly. Consider this your only warning. The transmission cut off. Torres sat back, mind racing through options. 12 hours was not enough time to evacuate everyone, not with the number of critical medical cases that required careful transport. But it was also clear that Zaxxer would make good on his threat. The corporate ships were already moving into blockade positions, cutting off easy escape routes. Torres opened a channel to all his ship commanders. All units, Priority 1. We have 12 hours to complete evacuation. I want all teams doubling their efforts. Pull personnel from non-essential duties and get them into submersibles. Medical teams, start making hard calls about who can travel now versus who needs more stabilization. We are not leaving anyone behind, so we need to work fast and smart. The pace of operations increased dramatically. More submersibles were deployed, more medical teams went into the water, more Thessari were loaded onto transports at rates that pushed safety margins. Dr. Okonkwo found herself making impossible decisions, choosing which patients could survive immediate transport versus which needed more treatment time they did not have. She hated every choice, but she made them quickly and moved on, because hesitation meant more deaths. Lieutenant Commander Rashid coordinated what amounted to an underwater logistical miracle, moving thousands of people through freezing toxic water while maintaining some semblance of order. 8 hours into the evacuation, with perhaps 15,000 Thessari still waiting to board, one of Torres's officers reported movement from the Zephron ships. Sir, corporate vessels are moving into closer orbit. They are powering up weapon systems. It looks like they are preparing to enforce their deadline early. Torres made a decision that would either save lives or end his career, possibly both. All military escorts, move to defensive formation around the transports. If they fire on us, we return fire, but only to disable, not destroy. Our goal is to buy time, not start a war. Open a channel to Captain Zaxxer. The Vorgothi appeared again, looking irritated. Commander, your time is not yet expired. We gave you 12 hours. Torres leaned forward. And we are using every minute of it. Captain, I want you to understand something. Those transport ships contain 30,000 refugees right now. If you fire on them, you will be committing mass murder in front of dozens of human recording devices. Every civilization in the galaxy will see exactly what the Zephron Corporation considers acceptable business practice. Is that really the publicity you want? Zaxxer's expression was unreadable, but he did not immediately order his ships to fire. Torres pressed his advantage. Here is what I propose. You let us finish our evacuation, we leave peacefully, and you go back to your mining operations on a world that will be empty of anyone who might complicate your profits. You get what you want, we get what we want, and nobody has to explain to their superiors why a rescue operation turned into an interstellar incident. The silence stretched for 30 seconds. Then Zaxxer responded, his tone suggesting he was making a calculation rather than a moral choice. You have 8 more hours. After that, any ship remaining in this system will be fired upon without further warning. And Commander? If any Thessari contracts are not fulfilled due to this evacuation, Earth will be held financially liable. Torres almost laughed. Bill us, Captain. We will handle it. The tension remained, but the immediate crisis passed. Human ships continued evacuation operations under the watchful censors of corporate warships, every moment feeling like borrowed time. The crews worked with desperate efficiency, knowing that every delay meant potentially leaving someone behind. The final submersible surfaced with Elder Morphix and the last group of Thessari 6 hours and 43 minutes after Zaxxer's extension. Rashid personally escorted them to the Perseverance, where Dr. Okonkwo had prepared the last available medical bay. Morphix was deteriorating rapidly, his bioluminescence barely visible, but his translated voice still carried strength. Commander Torres, all of my people who could travel are now aboard your ships. There are perhaps 2,000 still on Thessera, too ill to survive transport or too committed to remaining with their home world. We have said our goodbyes. It is time for you to leave before more violence comes. Torres met the Elder's gaze through the water-filled medical chamber. Elder, we have room. If there are any who want to come, we can extend our departure. Morphix's patterns flickered in what might have been gratitude or sadness. Some deaths are chosen, Commander. Those who remain have made their peace. Please, take my people to safety and do not let our light fade completely from the universe. The fleet began its departure sequence, ships breaking orbit in coordinated waves while maintaining defensive formations. The Zephron vessels tracked them but did not fire, apparently satisfied that their point had been made. Torres watched Thessera recede in his viewscreen, seeing the ice moon growing smaller, knowing that somewhere beneath that frozen surface, 2,000 Thessari were facing their final moments in the dying oceans of their home. It felt like failure even though they had saved 60,000 lives. The journey back to Earth took 4 days. During that time, Dr. Okonkwo and her teams worked constantly to treat chemical poisoning, stabilize critical cases, and begin the long process of healing bodies that had endured months of toxic exposure. They lost another 143 patients during the journey, each death a weight on Maya's conscience, but they saved thousands more who would have died within days without intervention. Elder Morphix spent the journey learning about Earth, studying images of its oceans, asking questions about humanity's history and values. He wanted to understand these strange beings who had risked everything for people they had never met, who had broken laws to uphold principles, who had chosen compassion over compliance. Sarah Chen, who had traveled with the fleet specifically to coordinate refugee settlement, spent hours in conversation with him, explaining humanity's complicated history, its failures and redemptions, its ongoing struggle to become better than it had been. When they arrived at Earth, news of the rescue had already spread throughout the galactic community. The response was exactly as predicted. The Galactic Council officially censured Earth for violation of corporate sovereignty and interference with legal business operations. 17 civilizations suspended trade agreements. The Zephron Corporation filed lawsuits demanding compensation for lost productivity and breach of contract. Humanity's reputation as a naive upstart species was confirmed in the eyes of many older civilizations. President Vasquez addressed Earth's population and the galaxy in a broadcast that would be studied for decades. She stood in the council chambers in Geneva, with Elder Morphix floating in a water-filled tank beside her, and she spoke without notes or diplomatic hedging. Today, humanity stands accused of breaking galactic law to save 60,000 lives. We are told that we violated corporate rights, that we interfered with legal business, that we set dangerous precedents. And to all of these accusations, I say simply, yes, we did. We broke laws that valued contracts over lives, that prioritized profit over people, that allowed genocide to hide behind legal language. And we would do it again tomorrow. The Thessari people are not resources to be extracted or commodities to be traded. They are sentient beings with art, culture, history, and an inherent right to exist. If the galactic community's laws do not recognize that, then those laws are unjust and deserve to be broken. She continued, her voice strengthening. Humanity has spent its history learning painful lessons about the cost of looking away, about the price of choosing convenience over conscience. We have failed those lessons many times, have allowed atrocities to happen when we could have acted. But we have also learned that the only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good people to do nothing. Today, we chose to do something. We chose to act. We chose to stand with the Thessari when the entire galaxy turned away. And if that makes us outcasts, if that costs us economically, if that marks us as troublemakers and idealists, then so be it. We would rather be judged for our compassion than for our complicity. The broadcast ended with images of Thessari refugees settling into modified ocean habitats off the coast of New Zealand, their bioluminescence beginning to strengthen as their bodies healed in clean water. The contrast to the dying oceans of Thessera was stark and powerful. In the weeks that followed, something unexpected happened. 3 smaller civilizations quietly approached Earth about establishing closer diplomatic ties. A grassroots movement began among younger species calling for council reform and stronger protections for vulnerable populations. The Zephron Corporation faced protests and boycotts from multiple worlds, their stock value dropping as consumers questioned their practices. It was not enough to fundamentally change galactic politics, but it was a start, a small crack in the edifice of institutional indifference. Elder Morphix lived for another 6 years in Earth's oceans, long enough to see his people begin to rebuild their culture, to teach a new generation of Thessari about their heritage, to compose songs of gratitude that humans could barely comprehend but deeply appreciated. On the day he died, surrounded by his people in waters that had become their new home, his final bioluminescent message translated to simply, "Thank you for proving that someone cared." Commander Torres received a formal reprimand from the Galactic Council and a medal from Earth's government on the same day. He kept the reprimand in his office as a reminder of what it cost to do the right thing and wore the medal to remind himself why it was worth it. Dr. Okonkwo continued treating Thessari patients, becoming the galaxy's foremost expert on their biology and founding a medical exchange program that brought xenobiologists from multiple species to Earth. And Ambassador Sarah Chin continued fighting in the council, armed now with proof that moral stands could inspire change, that one species standing firm could move the immovable, that laws were not permanent truths but human constructs that could and should be challenged when they permitted injustice. The galaxy had abandoned the Thessari to die, but humanity had chosen differently. Not because it was easy or profitable or politically advantageous, but because when someone was drowning and you had the means to help, you threw them a lifeline. It was that simple and that complicated, and it defined what humanity wanted to be among the stars, a species that broke unjust laws, that prioritized compassion over compliance, that stood with the vulnerable even when standing alone. The Thessari light did not fade after all. It found a new home, a new hope, and a reminder that in a cold universe, the warmth of compassion could change everything.